Yo,
Good
Morning.
morning, everybody.
Bill, welcome back.
Yeah, good to be back.
Thanks for coming on,
What
Bill.
you guys I'm jumping right in, Christian, if you don't mind. We've
Go for it.
we've got
Bill's
59
been on the
minutes
show,
with no
so
time to waste. You
yeah.
guys do you guys relaunched in February of last year?
February,
Is that
yeah,
right?
February 2024. That's right. Yeah,
So you're coming up on a year.
coming up on a year.
We're gonna
How,
want to hear how it's been going.
yeah, I
So
mean,
to get into
like what has transpired in the last year that you least expected would happen?
in general, even
Least expected. Yeah, so we set out last year to launch like three parts of the product. So originally when we acquired Convoy Tech Stack, thought we were going to relaunch the enterprise side, go after first party freight, we'd go after third party freight, and then we launched Drayage product. Well, I think the biggest surprise was just like the pivot to being fully third party and away from first party, which is kind of market driven, but also just really like as we went out and had conversations and met with parties, like I think that was probably the biggest change in terms of the business itself and the I think level of reception. I think the other big one, which I'm sure we'll get into in 2024, the big surprise, I think pivot in the market in general was this like rise of AI and how that's started to plug into everything we do top to bottom. And I think that's also going to be a big wave into 2025. But yeah, for us internally, as we launched the platform, I think the big pivot and the big change and the big just strategic shift was making this decision to only be a technology company and to not to be a broker.
So that wasn't decided when you guys made the acquisition?
No, absolutely not. Because when we acquired the tech, the business was dead, and we had to restart it as a company, and we had to go rehire everybody. I mean, it was just the tech and the license that we bought. So like we didn't have any people or anything. So we had to build everything from scratch, and the objective was to get it to take this tech, bring it back to market in the most profitable way. We wanted to build a profitable business, and with that, though, of course, Convoy had been a broker, and so we could look at all of the data and how they'd done profitability, like customer, and try to really zero in. And so we did go and have those conversations out of the gate. And I think what happened is we definitely had some immediate interest from customers that were like, yeah, this worked for us before. Let's jump back in. But generally, most shippers, I think this was a challenge with the model in general, and we went through this somewhat at Uber Freight as well. The shippers are fairly conservative in their approach to market, and it just takes very long drive change and to build back up. And in this market, Convoy had mainly big, like Fortune 500 shippers, and those shippers, they have everything they need in this market, and so they don't really like need a new provider to come back in. And if they do, they want you to come in at like 15 to 20%. And it's very different than like if I'm going to build a brokerage from scratch, like we did it, like the same way we started Uber Freight or Coyote, I'm going to start calling like paper companies, little shippers, and kind of build piece by piece. This was a very different proposition, which is like they've got these tier one customers and those conversations are open. We have the relations. Can we step back in, right back in, and turn on these tier one customers? And it was kind of a mixed bag in terms of engagement. But on the broker side, it was immediately like, yeah, we would definitely use this, and we would use it even twice as much if you weren't competing with us and like all these market.
Yeah, there were kind of weird incentives. I mean, do you think if the market had been in a different state, you would have done things differently?
I don't know. I think it was probably a blessing and that it also forced us to focus, because it was such a clarifying moment internally. Because for the team, like if you can imagine from the product side as well, having the whole team just focused on building technology for brokers, not having to work, because having to split the tech and the interfaces and build all these additional features and hierarchical like user management for different for both profiles is just is a challenge in itself. And also, Convoy had built a lot of excellent shipper tech, but a lot of stuff that was also point solutions or like for a specific client or only two clients. And that stuff just takes a lot of overhead to maintain on an ongoing basis. So to have that focus, it's very clarifying. And because we have a significantly smaller team than when Convoy was building this originally, I think that was essential. Like, we've got to be focused. We got to be able to push fast, and we got to take the pieces that were the most effective and leverage those. And that's the product market fit was also just tighter. And there's it's a more of a SaaS sale too. So from a org structure, we don't have to build the brokerage floor, right?
Sure.
We enable the brokerage floor, but we don't have to go build the brokerage floor. So from an org structure and a company, there's just it's just a cleaner alignment internally. So
because of this change, how much I guess how much smaller is the team now? Because since it's only just focusing on the tech and product, like even percentage wise, if you're not.
Yeah, we brought over 45 people in the product and engineering team. We've since added some sales and operations. So the Convoy specific team is roughly around 70-ish today. The prior to wind down, when Convoy was peaking, when they had max investment, they had something like 1,200 engineers on the team, I believe.
Engineers,
1,200 engineers.
I know they had about 120 just data scientists, to give you some sense.
Yeah.
Of how big that team.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
Now when it
that's
had
crazy.
And when it had by the end, I think they were around 300, 350 in that range.
Yeah.
So you can get I mean, it's a fraction of the team. Now, what's great about the team too is I think the other like big learning, and something you just learn over and over again, is like when you have a great team, a fantastic team, a high performing team, just how fast they can move and how effectively, because it is like the team that came over, it's true believers, it's high performers. It like the team whittled down to those that are committed, believe in the vision, and just are all in. And it's a pretty senior heavy team that we brought in, a team that had, because we wanted the senior engineers that had full visibility across the whole stack and could do, wear multiple hats and just get stuff done, but also would go in and get their, hands dirty and do the work. And the amount of, because a big part of it too is you can imagine like a tech stack maintained by that many engineers to be able to pare it down to and focus it, pick the pieces. Like there's a ton of, you got to really understand the system top to bottom. And there was a ton of work right out of the gate. It's just like paring it down to the essentials to get it back online.
It almost sounds a little bit like the post Twitter acquisition story when they were.
No, that is like, I think that's the other. We learned that lesson with Convoy. We also learned that lesson in Flexport. That was one of the big. We had our own struggles because when we went through leadership transition, we had done a massive hiring surge, and we had to bring the team back down to basically the levels it had been. We're effectively from like an engine. We're at the levels we were like 2022-ish. So, and to bring the team down so dramatically, and actually at the end of it, be all the performance metrics to improve, or our customer satisfaction to improve, to see how much more just efficiently we're operating and effectively. Because you do, it's like so much, I'd say, waste gets just hidden and as the orgs scale. And functions don't get poked or questioned, and like there's a certain amount of bloat that I think just becomes built into orgs as they scale. That's very hard to identify or weed out sometimes. And when you're forced to go through these sorts of changes and move very quickly, then it's this super focusing function that really forces you to get to like, okay, who are the most essential, most critical, and then you also discover, okay, how much weight were they actually bearing on their shoulders, or can they bear? And in the end, you end up with like this faster, leaner, more effective, like higher performing organization. Which, having been through that now, it's just it was very like I definitely, there's a lot of like, it's scary going through it because there's so much uncertainty on the other side as to like, okay, is it actually going to work? Like you of course you end up like in these things, like there's a lot of exceptional people. I don't want to say that like those 1,200 people are like at Convoy. I mean, there were fantastic, exceptional people, and it probably could have been a different mix of people at the end. But it's also that the bureaucracy that gets created, and there's an inefficiency just in the communication channels. And I can tell you from like a management, I've managed all different sizes of teams, and it's just, there's something like, as teams get bigger too, it's just, of course you don't know everybody. Like, there's a point at which you just can't like have your hands on everything as it gets bigger.
How did you learn to grow into that kind of a, I guess we can call it a feeling, like where you're, there's a ton of people that are working underneath you that you don't know. I mean, I guess at some point everybody has to kind of experience that transition. How did that kind of go for you?
Yeah, I forget the name of the law, right? But that you could only know about 120, 150 people. Like there's a few different versions of this, and they've done studies on this. Like at some point, you can't put faces to names, and your brain starts to like move people out for other people. Like you can only maintain so many personal relationships. I think from a org structure at a certain scale, like you have to have the right infrastructure in place, because it's a lot about data signals. Like, are you losing track with what's on the ground, and do you have blind spots? And so I think as a leader at a certain scale, you have to be able to, you got to have the right metrics in place. And a lot of it is it's the the organizational infrastructure stuff, which is not as like I'd say exciting, right? It's like,
to
do
me,
you have the right meetings?
personally,
Do you have the right metrics? Do you have the right operating cadence? I'd say almost every effective operations organization I've been in, you have a standard, WBRs, you have MBRs, right? And you revise those things continually. They're never static. You're always poking and saying, hey, like, what am I not hearing? What do I not know? Like, what are the unknown unknowns? Or like, what do I need to uncover? And if it gets static, right? Because then people also learn to like tell the right story for the format, and
for the purpose.
After like 3 months, you're kind of just hearing the same things, and then it's like, okay, well, we need to turn this over, or maybe poke somewhere else. Or
what's the WDR?
Weekly business reviews.
Weekly business reviews.
Yeah.
Okay. That's like
you guys do lots of meetings or what? No meetings? Some meetings? Are you strict about meetings? Lots of meetings?
I'd say it's a balance of that. I could continually audit my meetings. I actually have my own personal tracker that has like how many hours I am in meetings based on the operating meetings. And as an example, like we're going through the process right now across all of Flexport of revising those meetings for 2025, because new goals, new meetings, right? It's like we need to make sure that we're aligning our meetings with the goals, all that kind of. You have to go through this house cleaning periodically and trying to compress those meetings, because I try not to be. You got to have like
more talking, less doing. Or sorry, other way around. More doing, less talking.
More doing and thinking and building time. Less let's just
so you're it's kind of interesting because like had you gone the brokerage route again, you would be I'm just thinking about how like the market conditions affect who's easier to acquire, right? Because you're still a marketplace, right? In a sense. Yep. And if you were a broker, you'd still be a marketplace, but you'd be connecting the carriers and the shippers. But now you're connecting carriers with brokers. And when the market's terrible, like it's been for the last couple of years, maybe it's easier to acquire carriers, and maybe it's harder to get brokers. I mean, what have you seen in this sort of dynamic? Like, how has it been?
You mean from like M&A and what the market looks like out there?
Yeah, well, just the state of the freight market and how it's affected your ability to pick up the proverbial phone and get in front of carriers and be like, hey, we've got this.
Oh
we're back, and then vice versa. Pick up the phone and call the brokers and be like, hey, do you guys need this to find additional capacity, in your network, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, like what carriers and brokers need and tighten and it's tighter soft markets is very different. So in the bear market, on the carrier side, I would say carriers are of course looking for freight, and so they will look at every option. And certainly, it would be hard for a marketplace to capture a carrier exclusively in a very tight market, because the smart carrier is going to be looking at every option and start to understand what freight is on which platforms. And for us, the advantage that we have coming in the market is from a carrier perspective, the brand perception of Convoy was very positive. You heard stories. There were, of course, like issues and friction at the very end, but by and large, carriers that were on the platform had a good experience. Plus, Convoy, all that money and all those engineers had built this fantastic product for carriers, and so for carriers logging in, it's just so easy. So we had very like we did a lot. We've done, of course, a ton of outreach. We have approaching 30,000 carriers in the platform, and we got very we just had very good retention of carriers that had previously been on the platform that we reached out to that came back. I think part of that is because it is a bear market, right? They're going to look for where the freight is. But a big part of it, because we also do a lot of sentiment analysis with our carriers, is they do prefer the Convoy experience. And that's something that we want to continue to invest in, because I want to be, the first place a carrier wants to go to find a small carrier or an owner operator. They've got app options. I want to be top of that preference stack. First place they go, because it's easiest, because it's just, I hit a button, I manage the transaction. It's the most simple, best user experience. So on that side, it hasn't been a challenge. And that was another, I'd say, early surprise, because for our marketplace, right, it's the carriers, the brokers, and it was the shippers, right? But for the brokers, it still is the shippers, right? And getting all those parties aligned with what we're building, and are they interested? That was the open question. The carrier side was the first one where we're like, yes, absolutely, they're engaged, they're ready to sign back on, and we've got very positive signals. For the brokers, it's there's two sides. For the advantage of what we're selling, there are several different value propositions. So the first is there's a OpEx savings. And I think part of the reason that you've seen like lean solutions explode and BPOs explode, and now this wave of AI really get interest and adoption and buy-in right out of the gate, is because in a bear market, if the rates aren't going up, the only way you can make more money is to lower your OpEx, or the only way you can stay in the game is to lower your OpEx. So it has become a critical focus over the last 2 years for a lot of brokers. And I also think on the other side of this, those brokers that did the best job of getting their OpEx in line are going to be, of course, best positioned. Those that did it with, I think, tech and built the flexibility to be able to scale, I think, are also going to have an extra advantage, because they won't have the same variable constraints, right? I think as we get into the next bull market, it's just going to be very interesting, because all this work that the brokers have put into just getting their operations in order and getting their businesses in order, it's going to start to bear fruit, and it'll bear fruit in different ways depending on which tools they invested in, their SOPs.
Yeah.
Like, it'll be an interesting.
So let's actually talk about that, Bill. In terms of tools, right? One of actually a happy sponsor, Freight Caviar, Happy Robot, I think, is also a vendor that you guys are using, if I'm not mistaken, or at least you guys are using one of the tools, right?
Yeah.
How's your experience been so far? And what was, I mean, there's a lot of surprising things about how quickly it all happened, from my perspective, but I would love to hear it from yours. Like, did you think that it was going to be this rapid of an adoption in general across the market?
Well, it's one of those where yes, in the sense that ever since we started using them heavily, I've been of the mind that 2025, we're just going to see an inflection point across the market. And the reason is that I started to list, like, having some of these voice agent AI companies come in and present, like, probably a year ago. And like early on, they all were kind of crap, right? It was like, they just sounded like another call agent, and like, they didn't.
You could tell it was a machine.
Yeah. They didn't cross the uncanny valley. And so it wasn't like Happy Robot was the first that came in. It was like, oh wow, this is something that's actually like sounds real, and it's and they've only refined since then. And it's one of our favorite internal tech demos is to play one of these calls, and everybody's like, oh man, that's amazing.
Really good.
Because it has gotten to that level where most carriers don't know, and even if they do, they don't really care. So it's like there's not that from a and I say carriers because that's our primary. Like for us, it's like inbound carriers or calling outbound to carriers in the network. That's our primary engagement. But most of them like it, and don't really know the difference or don't care if they do. But the inflection point was really doing the math. Like, so for us, like, does it make sense from a, like, can we actually get a similar quality result out of this? And does it allow us to scale like more effectively as a result? And so the answer was yes. And so that's why I think you're going to see rapid adoption. I mean, back to that, like, OpEx question, the brokers, it's a highly competitive market. So if it's an advantage, it will, if something is a measurable advantage, it will scale very rapidly.
So fun fact, I don't know if you know this, Bill or Reed, but the voice for the Happy Robot agent is actually Javi's girlfriend's voice. So they recorded her for a couple hours, and then they basically fine-tuned that model.
Well, Pablo answers a lot of our calls too, so.
Yeah. Oh, I guess they trained his too. So
I I have a question. So like, or one thing that's interesting that I've just been thinking about is like, you guys are a lot of carriers tend to be stuck in their ways. A lot, I mean, everyone tends to be stuck in their ways um, to
Just
some degree, but like carriers especially, I think, are hard to move from like a tech standpoint.
Yeah.
And you guys are going to be, as time over as the next couple of years unfold, I think you'll probably tend to naturally attract carriers who are maybe a little more tech savvy, maybe a little younger, maybe a little more like adept with tech. And like it'll be interesting to see how that affects your ability, like how what fruit that bears long term as are you guys going to be better positioned to implement tools like this and whatever else appears just because you're naturally going to have a more kind of tech savvy user base.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's part
yeah,
of why we focused on the small carriers, is because it's the closest to like a consumer adoption where
yeah,
you
sure.
download an app and you're like living in the future. You don't have to go through, it's diametrically opposed to like it's the other end of the spectrum of like a Fortune 500 shipper, right? Where
Yeah.
integrating with them, it's like the ERP system, and so
Yeah, you don't
carriers
have to
may
worry
be
about
more.
single sign-on and all that
Yeah,
crap.
carriers may be fairly conservative, but they also are low overhead, and so they don't have big investments in these tools, and because they're more capital constrained, they're also more likely to use like an app or a free to use tool. So from that sense, you can drive adoption faster because there's not the friction of like the technology replacement that like a Fortune 500 where they've got $2 billion invested in SAP and they took 10 years to install it, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have that challenge. So you may have a more conservative technology approach, but you have a much lower barrier to entry or conversion to new technology. So yeah, I think the carriers, that's why with like the digitization of freight, they were the first to benefit, and that's where you've seen the most change in the market, because one of the big stories of the pandemic was the massive growth and surge in owner operators and small carriers. Now that has
Mhm.
reverted quite a bit, but it's still above where it was pre-pandemic by 80,000 carriers. So we've seen the shift of capacity to the long tail, and I do think that is directly because they have new technology tools and capabilities
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the apps in the market. And Convoy being, of course, a huge part of driving that change, but now you've got a lot of options, and the big brokers all put their apps out there, and then carriers, there's other good tools out there that they download and use, and it just changed how they interacted with the market and gave them more control. I think I would expect that we will continue to invest in features and improving the app and giving them more capabilities, and I would expect you'll see some consolidation in that space over time. But I also don't really believe in app fatigue, in the sense that if there's a better app, that people will use it, because again, carriers are very commercial, just like brokers. Like, they're looking for a little bit of edge, and so if there's a better solution, they will use the better solution.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
Bill, foundationally, you guys are offering capacity uh, to brokers in an automated, streamlined way. Is that something that's going to be uh, constrained within the Convoy app experience, meaning like the app for brokers itself? Like, is that something
No,
that
on the broker
you
side,
can-
it's yeah, that's a great lead in, because we have one of our big focus areas is partnering with all the TMSs on the broker side, and by and large, the TMSs and the brokers are I'd say easier to integrate with. They tend to be lighter weight installs, and like most of them are they're more. I say also because it's a competitive market, the lead players in that space also have to be more, I'd say, like leading edge, right? Again, it can't be like an Oracle or an SAP, and not to like dog on
Yeah.
them too much, but they don't have the same motivations to stay ahead of the curve or to drive everybody to the newest version, and they have they try to upcharge in all different ways. As where with the generally in the broker market, the TMSs, I'd say, are a little more advanced and sophisticated, and you've got new players that are cloud-based,
Yeah.
single version, which just makes it easier to kind of get the product, to get new features in, and drive partnerships. So far, we're partnering with Omnis and Broker Pro. Those are two that we've announced. We have several others in the work, but those are great partners out of the gate that have new generation tooling and TMS capabilities. And Yes, we want right now. So there is a we do have a portal, so brokers can go into a portal. We also have existing integrations with almost every TMS. So we are integrated in, but the difference is a lot of the way that the tools have been built is for like legacy marketplaces where maybe the booking and the bidding capabilities are there, but the Convoy platform is a different experience in that it's end to end for the carrier. So it's the booking, the bidding, the tracking, all the breadcrumb data is available. The POD and document uploads, the payments, like all that happens on the platform. So we need to be integrated. It's a more complete integration because it's every part of the load lifecycle. Because that's the experience from a carrier is I just, I click, I manage the load through the app. It's easy. Like I get paid. Like I don't have to worry about it. I know that if I'm using Convoy, I have trust. I need to get paid and everything's going to happen. And it's clean. So from a carrier perspective, it's very easy. From a broker's perspective, the fully integrated use cases is it should just happen in the background. It should be like having the way I always describe it should be like having a hot pot or like an extra, like an owner operator team that just operates like 24/7 and you don't have to worry about it. So all of our integrations, it's parallel load status management. So if a load gets booked on Convoy, it pulls off the board, right? There's bid information. So in a fully formed integration, they should be able to see those bids as they come through and respond to some of the bids as they come through, like through the application. Have full visibility of the carrier.
Is that is that something that TMSs have? Is that a new capability UI feature that TMSs have to build into their system because it's now possible for them to actually provide capacity availability through the app?
Like if you think most tools that already have existing marketplace integrations, most of that's already built in. There's a lot more data that we would love to be able to provide, and that we will work with TMS providers to integrate over time that we provide today or in our broker portal. So as an example, like probability of booking is so saying that this is a high probability that's going to move in the platform and giving more feedback on. We have a lot more granular data that we can provide that as an end state. I think the future for a lot of these platforms is, you'll have your integrations and you'll have your automations. And so with all those automations, the question is then what does your team work on and where should they focus and how do they, like, which relationships matter, like to pick up the phone versus like, you just know this, like this load is going to move because Convoy will pick it up versus this load. I've got a relationship and, I know that my carrier has loads later trucks in Topeka. So this is probably the best one you should call today, right? I think that's also where AI will get interesting because I know a lot of people are working on this problem too, but within the TMSs to be able to suggest like who you should call, but who you should call should also be informed by what loads are likely to work, just automatically get booked and which loads are going to take some work or which loads are best for your existing relationship you need to call anyway.
Yeah, for sure. What is I've always kind of thought about the fact that everybody who is a freight tech provider and trying to integrate with these TMSs, everybody develops their own TMS integration pipelines on their own, and it seems like every single person has to go through that hurdle. Have you heard of any, I don't know, something like a Zapier for TMSs? Is that something that even
we partner with some there are system integrators who are trying to try to build out middleware or standardize these integration processes. I'll give a shout out to Metaphora. We work with that team. They've got a product sockets and, they've been great in helping with that and specific integrations. And, we are talking to other system integrators as well. Like it's good, there's some of them have different specialties and different focus areas or have just good relationships with one TMS that they've really zeroed in on. So yeah, those companies exist out there. Now, I would say it's not as standardized as like Plaid or some of the other, some other markets that have these like, very robust, but also every market is slight in fragmentation. The number of broker TMSs is fairly discrete. So there's other markets that have much higher fragmentation. I think, ELD integrations and what the tracking companies have to go through on that end, there's like a longer list of companies and integrations. So, the dynamics are slightly different depending on like, the level of integration and the fragmentation of systems on each end. But
I have heard of ELD Plaid. but they're pretty expensive. They charge like on a per, I think there's like on a per connection or per truck basis that you have connected. I forgot what their name was. I think it was like Terminal or something like this.
There's a few out there, and there's definitely new companies stepping into in that integration space. We're talking
it helps for sure, but like it seems like they're pretty expensive from what we've looked into.
It will always, as long as the market is fragmented, and as long as you've got new entrants, it's. I think the next one will like. Now you have like such this massive wave of AI companies coming in, and they're all building their own platforms, their own agents. Now, I'm like, I think that's going to be the interesting story of 2025 to see how that evolves. But I don't like if I would guess that probably opens up different types of intermediaries that we're not thinking about yet in terms of opportunities. Or like, I do think that from a broker perspective, just understanding how to piece all these things together, like it's going to be a challenge. Like, and how to that point I made earlier about like the TMS. Ultimately, I think the TMS should be the portal by which all this comes together. But who wires it up and which companies are involved in that?
I imagine as you guys talk to brokers, you catch wind of how they're receiving a lot of these tools. You probably see varying degrees of adoption. What are they saying to you just about the general state of this all?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say that we generally talk to the, if you think about the adoption curve, the companies that are at our table and signing our deals are going to be at that early adopter curve. So there's certainly people that have signed up that are looking at the full suite of tools. Like there's several CEOs like I can think of right off the top of my head that just like they want to try the new stuff and always be at the front of the curve because they want to get their hands in it and figure it out and come up with the new models. But I'd say that's probably not the default. And what was an interesting moment to me was, actually back to like AI and voice agents. I was at the Inland JOC conference in Chicago and asked the audience like, okay, like who's using voice AI? And we were already like 2 or 3 months into it at this point, and like not a single person raised their hand. And I was like, oh, okay.
It's crazy how only just very recently like that difference existed, right? Like I think it was what JOC was in September, October.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Nobody was using it, and then about a month or two later, it was like the talk of the town. So crazy how quickly it.
That's why I think 2025 will. And again, it is like for most. I mean, brokerage is you win in brokerage. I'd say first I think the priority stack in terms of capabilities in brokerage is first you got to be commercial, and second you got to be operational. Like if you get those two things right alone, like you can be highly successful in brokerage, and particularly if you're just like there's a lot of super sellers in this space that have built lifestyle businesses, and built $100 million brokers on their own backs. Like that has happened multiple times and will happen time and time again. But the tech piece, you don't have to be innovative and you don't have to be tech forward to be successful in the space historically. And so I think that we are in a time of market transition where this stuff is coming through quick and it's going to weed people out, and it will be a bigger part of that picture. I definitely think that it's going to be very hard not to be tech forward in the next 5 years if you aren't adopting these, and laggards are going to get caught out. But I don't think that's been the case in my 20 years in brokers historically. I think it's technology change cycles have been pretty slow, and it's more like people talk more about the models like Chicago or which I've been in the middle of many of those conversations as well. Like, but they don't talk about like the tech structure, like how tech enables the floor so much.
The cost of software development in general, right? It's trending towards zero. I don't know when exactly it will be zero, right? But as we can all tell, it's getting cheaper and cheaper to develop software, and so that kind of got me thinking a lot recently about this. It's found very similar in high frequency trading, where traders are all trying to build their own software, have some competitive advantage over the algorithms or whatever. You can sometimes find that also in brokerage, which has like some similar properties to trading, in the sense that will people long term, or brokerages long term, be building, or since they'll be able to for quite little money, be able to build their own TMS stack and proprietary, I don't know, ways of algorithms. And there's a lot of variables that obviously can go into that. But generally speaking, if the cost of software development does keep going down, what does that actually change? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it can go a couple different ways, because I think that historically TMSs haven't tried to impose like a operating model or way of doing business on people. But I think that there will come to rise like optimal ways of doing business in the next 3 years with all these tools, that the TMSs that can like enable that, I think will probably have an advantage. Like in terms of install base, I do think that it will be hard, like even in 5-10 years, if the cost of coding is almost zero, there's still an expertise in like, okay, how do you architect the system? How do you think through it?
Definitely, for sure.
Maybe like AGI is at that point where it can just do it, but I think practically like somebody still has to lay it out. And I think what you see too is with this first wave of AI, people throwing AI on top of the same bad processes, right? Not really changing the tooling of the process, just saying, hey, AI do this, which is also probably not the right answer. And so I think there's like the best companies will bring a certain level of thinking and like be consultative and have the expertise to work with brokers to say like, we've got the tool. Here's the ideal way of packaging this together. We've got the toolkit to do it. And the other thing, I mean, the other side of this is all of the existing companies are also using, like we're using AI coding tools. Like we are aggressively implementing AI across the enterprise, just like everybody. And it's kind of it's a push and a pull, because there's definitely like, you've got internal champions on these capabilities, but also like people like the status quo, right? You're always fighting the status quo in terms of like, no, like go try this tool. But I think that's the other side of it, is that all your legacy companies are also going to be embracing these tools. And so improving their own coding speed, which means their own pace of iteration. But they have to deal with the legacy install base, which is probably a benefit and a liability, right? Because it's a liability because yes, like, this stuff, like it's just going to take longer to turn it over into the new stuff. And somebody else could step in between with a better product and displace you. But a benefit because they have the relationships. I think that's in our space and B2B spaces, that's like been, a 20-year lesson for me too, is just the importance of the commercial relationships and how that kind of slows down both the pace of innovation, but also like, drives value in the ecosystem, because like that level of trust engagement means also a certain amount of stability and consistency, and like lowers the risk to all parties involved. And that's why I think that companies that are in the space today participating are always going to have a bit of an advantage, and it's theirs to lose, because you're in the door, you have the relationship, and somebody coming in if they've got to build all that from scratch. There's definitely like, it's, now that I'm 20 years in and I see new entrants that like with these golden resumes starting companies, there's always a little bit of a like, hey, you got to earn your stripes in this space. And you get that sense from everybody. It's like, are you really a freight person or not? Right. And I think that will always create a little bit of a friction. And so people that already have earned their stripes, that are also embracing the tech and that are like 2 steps ahead and already have the install base, like I wouldn't discount that. I think it's a space that's very hard, and as evidenced by the billions of dollars that we spent at Uber Freight and Convoy, it's very hard to just brute force and disrupt the space, because there's so much stickiness in those relationships and existing tools and like existing ways of doing business. It is a slow moving space, for better or worse, right?
For better or worse.
Better if you're already deep into it, right? For worse, if you're coming right fresh and think you're going to change the world. It's just like there's a lot of extra friction that I don't think most people from the outside can really intuit until they get into it.
There was these 2 distinct market windows that I've seen since I've gotten into freight in 2016. And the first one was the ELD mandate. A bunch of companies, obviously Samsara and Keep Trucking, started slightly before then, but there was this market window that opened because of government, regulations. Now Samsara is what, a $2 billion dollar company. Yeah. And then now the second window that really didn't, like, there was no it was friction free, essentially, right? To come into the market, which is now voice. It seems like voice agents, at least. There's other agents.
So this is interesting. I mean, it is moving very quickly, and I also think there is a first mover advantage, because once you've got your partner, like again, a lot of these companies are relatively, even if they are tech forward, it's not like they're going to go vet 20 more partners, right? And try to find the one that's slightly better. Like you kind of, your foot's in the door now, you're good, right? So
We're good to go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Well, I mean, like, what's your take on just the commoditization or potential commoditization of these tools? I mean, the difference I see between, this generation of freight tech and, generations previous is, Uber Freight and Convoy had such a massive capital requirement I mean, it took so much. It just took a lot of energy to build and drive the change they were seeking to make, and it necessarily got, like, the challenge was getting folks onto new platforms, right? Which is a huge challenge. But now, like, these, the AI voice, if we just stick on that, it's like that's not requiring any platform change on the end user. You know what I mean? Like, they're still just getting phone calls, and so the adoption, what goes into driving adoption is just way less, and it's just going to be interesting to see what that necessarily, and so that just means that the first mover advantage from the vendor side of things is maybe more just about getting embedded and sticky into the brokers or whoever the customers, but like the barrier to build is not, I mean, it's basically nothing, like,
yes and no. I think
how does this go?
Yeah, I mean, within a user, like within our business, we have expert users that are building out these agents and fine tuning them and refining them continually, like on a weekly basis, and expanding new SOPs. So there is a little bit of stickiness in that, and I think the point is valid in terms of like how do you differentiate? Because I'm also seeing a ton where I do not like know how to vet AI companies when it's like two people and they've got an idea and this is what we're going to do with AI. It's like, well, what value do you add? Like, we've got two people over here that also know AI. Right?
More than two people, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So I think and there's a wave of those companies that are just at that phase. And so I think with Happy Robot now, they've got a little bit of escape velocity because they went through fundraising. Vuma and others in our space are getting funded, and I think most of these companies too are focused on building out like platforms, right? Or different. It's interesting because there's slightly different models coming to market, and everybody I think is trying to figure this out too because of these exact reasons. Like, what is the competitive differentiator? I think that said, you will still have a scaled, like there will be scaled AI platform companies that are logistics specific that likely come out of this initial set. I think I do think in this market there is again going to be a bit of a first mover advantage because these companies, like, they're not going to just switch providers every 6 months, and if these companies are already proving value, then it's just for them to lose and their advantage to accrue.
There's a decent integration component that goes into these
because you have to expose, like, you want to if you to really get value out of these phone calls, right? You want the agent to have access to all of your information, which means you need to expose it via API, and so you have to build those API integrations. And so, yeah, there is some stickiness. You can feed it like CSV data and have it go. I think most of the competition will probably be again from in-house. It'll be build versus buy, particularly as you get to bigger companies. I think for the mid-sized brokers that won't necessarily be a conversation, but for the top 10 to 20, that will be the conversation. Because if you think about the TQLC, like if you watch CH's investor deck, like they are very big on their tech and investing in tech, and certainly they're going to try to stay ahead of all the trends, and all the big guys are going to try to stay ahead of the trends. So I think that's probably that will be the interesting question is like, can they get penetration with some of the bigger players or build enough of a competitive differentiator in terms of capabilities to do that?
Do you think somebody like a CH would go out and offer a SaaS-like type product? for?
I don't think they would offer a product, but I think they'll build their own capability. I mean, they're already talking about quite a bit of their own AI capabilities. I think every top 10 provider has AI on their website now.
Yeah,
yeah.
If you
because it is like the barriers to entry of usage are so low. Again, like building a competency and a capability, there will be a capability, path, and people will have to kind of move through a maturity like curve in terms of usage on this. But I haven't seen anybody articulate like what that looks like. But as an example, like uploading CSVs would be like the most basic implementation for a voice agent, and next implementation. And the most basic AI usage would be the executives all using ChatGPT or Grok or whatever, or Notebook LLM. Like those sorts of tools, I think, are just going to become common usage among most executives in most companies over time. But then on the for the operations side, like there's operating tools, or on the coding side, like are they using all the new like Cursor or whatnot, or like are they using all the new AI tools?
Grok with a K or Grok with a Q?
With a K.
Grok with a K. Have you guys actually just total side note? But have you guys heard of the company Grok, like the Grok with a Q though?
Yeah.
Wait, what's
That's
that?
the same guy who did the tensor compute units at Google. He left and he started his own company. They made like a LPU, I think, like a language.
I mean, it's like a different platform for AI, right?
That
it's
thing
like
is
you don't need you don't need to buy NVIDIA GPUs to train models, right? I mean, isn't that the idea of
wasn't this like didn't Chamath invest in this? I think he talked about it.
I think he did. Yes, I think he did. Now that you mentioned it,
he was hyping up. I think on one of their podcasts.
Yeah, he was definitely.
Can I be the Chamath of the Freight Gong Friday show? I mean, Paul, you can be Christian. You can be Jason Calcanis. How's that sound?
Oh boy, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but we'll see.
Does it make? Yeah.
What we've got 12 minutes left. Let's you guys want to talk about the market, like Bill, where you think things are going? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, we came in on a very strong week. Saw a lot of activity on first week of January. FreightWaves published some data that, except like rejection rates, got all the way up to 10%, which was the highest since April 22. This week is a little more normal January, but in terms of what we're seeing in the market. But I'm optimistic in all other signals, like data sources that I pull. I do think this is the turnaround year. I think we've just seen, although initial demand signals are also coming a little bit soft, but I think capacity has just been on the steady decline since for the last 12 months, and FreightWaves talks a lot about like the alligator mouth, and like the demand and supply have to hit at some point, and it's kind of in the slow bleed.
But how are you guys at Flexport? Thinking about obviously some of the incoming changes from the administration, that might affect how imports, exports, move, and then how. I know Ryan's been talking a lot about like the port, the unions and the contract negotiations. Obviously, they got resolved, but how, in general, what are the thoughts going into 2025 around that?
Yeah, I'll start on the port question because I found it fascinating that Trump was supportive of the ILA in terms of their automation position. Yeah, and then on the other hand, Elon's making robots and autonomous vehicles, so clearly that wasn't an aligned agenda. There.
I think I explained it through to myself, but generally speaking, I think he knew that he wasn't going to win that.
Yeah.
He was just like, all right, let's. It
was a political move, so he's just trying to get a win. And,
exactly.
That's my read as well. But I don't think it's a battle the ILA can win forever. It's
definitely not,
and it's not beneficial to the economy. I think that with AI, in the wave of automation, we are on this pivot point where across multiple industries now, I think people are just a little bit on edge in terms of how it will impact them personally. And I do think a little bit of friction slowing the process down is helpful so that we can kind of manage through transitions. And I think the right thing for an ILA to do is to set even if it's a decades long timeline, to set a reasonable timeline, not to just block these things indefinitely.
Completely.
I think that's just like, head in the sand. It's just unrealistic. If you look at, and I think the other part of this is just the efficiency of logistics in a country really is a direct driver of industry and growth and GDP. And if you go back, like the U.S. has always been fairly, our interstate system and all the investment we made, back in the 50s post-war in infrastructure, and even before that, like we've always been I'd say, leading in terms of driving efficiency and logistics as a country. And for us, logistics is about 8% of GDP. If you go back to the 50s, it was like 16%. If you look at countries like India, it's still, or like less developed countries in terms of infrastructure or the friction, it can be 20, 25%. And that is a huge damper on just productivity of an economy and industrial base of an economy. And so for us to like have the least efficient ports, it just it makes no sense, right? It's just nobody benefits other than a few union dock workers. But
have you seen a fully automated port?
Yeah, like Rotterdam and China.
Yeah.
It's
how does it, is it just like a ghost town basically?
The what?
Is it just basically like a ghost town? There's just no people walking around, just a bunch of chassis.
Yeah, I don't know the exact ratios, but it's it's a fraction of the number of headcount that you see.
It's interesting to talk about, to frame that conversation around just like the national interest, if you will, because I think in my experience talking to folks, like domestic, freight brokers, trucking people who just kind of operate nationally, I feel like never really take that frame when they talk about their business or they talk about the market or anything like that. But then when I talk to people who are international focused, be it ocean or air or whatever those modes, they tend to be thinking a lot more about like, okay, like this needs to work this way because that's what's good for the country, right? And it might also be good for them, but there seems to be more of an alignment between those two things. And I just never hear broker types being like, our system needs to operate this way because it's more efficient and better for the country. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I think the ground freight transportation system is fairly efficient. And like, if you think about, like, that's part of why it's hard with new tech, is like it already is pretty mature and efficient. But the ports are not. And then like ocean liners, it's more of an oligopoly. So I think you've got a little more of a, there's more opportunity there, obviously, with the ports. I tell you, I in my 20 years in like ground transportation, I have had conversations with FEMA, and gone to like DoD conferences and so on. And they are definitely thinking about it. And if you go to like a DoD conference, and like it's all about like responsiveness of our system and like how quickly we can react. And similar like on FEMA side, and that's where, as we were digitizing freight and going down that path, there was a lot of interest in like, okay, well, how can this improve our responsiveness? And you see it in domestically when there's like a disaster or a winter storm or things like this, where the digital enabled systems tend to move a little bit faster, and the owner operators tend to be a little more responsive because they've got better information. And it's like they just like the reaction time is a little lower. And so taking friction out of the system does make you more responsive too. And so if you take that, back to the port conversation, like if your port's just bound up, like, if we need to respond to a situation quickly, it's just one other point of friction too. So outside of just like GDP growth and the broader efficiency of the economy and driving commerce and all the benefits that come with that, right? It's also like national responsiveness and to emergency situations. Like you want to have a very high functioning logistics capability and very efficient logistics capability as a country, because it is an asset for us as a nation to have those capabilities.
There's a reason that the quote goes like logistics wins wars, I guess. The better,
exactly.
The part that has logistics.
What about manufacturing? Domestic versus, or the whole nearshoring buzzword. I mean, how do you see all that?
Yeah, I think I do think it's going to be a very interesting 2025 on that front, because I think part of what Trump is doing now what we've seen is he's like expanding the negotiating window. He's definitely putting like stakes in the ground in terms of how he's going to approach these issues. And I mean, I would I would hazard a guess that like Mexico's response in terms of the 321 and the imports, like I would guess that's also like a bit of a preemptive response, right? And so I think we're going to see. I definitely think we're going to see some interesting trade deals. I think some of this threat around tariffs is again just to get people to the table. So
Yeah,
I don't think we can take it all at face value. I think we've got to like, but we should interpret as there will be change, and certainly he's going to impose change. I think
51st state of the United States of America.
what?
Canada, the 51st state of the United States of America.
Yeah,
that'd be interesting.
Yeah,
it's a similar. I think it's.
Right. It's like it's mind blowing to me how quickly this Greenland conversation has actually materialized as like a real thing now.
Yeah.
Denmark has basically said, "Hey, Greenland, if you want to, like,
yeah,
you can go." That's just insane. Like, I mean, that would be. We haven't, I don't know. I should go look like the last time that we took on new territory, but
it's been. I think it was in like 1950, 55 or something like that. Maybe a little bit before that, but I know that I looked into the whole Greenland thing. Like, why? I didn't even know. Like, why do we even like have an interest in Greenland? And it was basically because of the ice caps. And I think Reed, we talked about this last week. Like, since the ice caps are melting on the northern side, it opens up an additional passage way. And so I think having a national security interest, making sure that we have control over that passageway, it seems like, I guess that seems like a reasonable thing. But then again, like all Denmark just being like, cool with just giving up that big.
All of Denmark, it's like 200,000 people or something like that. I mean, it's yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Was it Denmark that was cool with it, or was it like just the people of Greenland? Or I don't even know. Denmark.
Who knows?
Denmark. I think Greenland's even much smaller than that. I think Denmark said that Greenland can self-determine. Or
interesting.
Yeah.
Bill, we got
Convoy platform office in Greenland soon, or
ice road trekking.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of logistics happens. I don't think there's a lot of freight activity. I don't know what the TAM is.
I don't think so. Bill, we got a couple minutes here left. Wanted to kind of wrap this up with the question, kind of just forward-looking. Actually, quite forward-looking. So, like generally speaking, you're going to be working. The team's going to be working on this for a long time. What does the platform look like in 2030? Something like 2035, right? Like, what's a longer term perspective?
Yeah, 2035. I was like, man, that's way out there. But I guess it's only 10 years, and I've been here in the industry 20 years. And so I'd like to say this, like flying cars and like Neuralink in 10 years, but knowing the pace, like what's happened in the last 20 years, it's probably somewhere something a little more material where. From a Convoy perspective, on the carrier side, like it is this. I just want to be the best possible experience. I want to be the first place they go for freight. I want to be like so easy to find freight that they just they know they're always going to get a load. They can keep moving. So continuing to build tools around that too, where they can just like manage routes and business and get consistent. Like we're launching contracts as an example for carriers, something Convoy had that we're relaunching, giving brokers access to that. Like, but they just have consistent access. I think the mediums by which they engage, like I do think AI will be deeply integrated in everything that we do. So, if they're wearing their Meta glasses or AR glasses, or like if maybe they do have their
Neuralink chip.
Yeah. If they're interacting it through other channels, like I can see those expansions in terms of like different channels of accessing information. Like that from a carrier perspective, though, I do expect even in 10 years, we'll still have drivers in the seat. I think I was super bullish on AV, back.
So did I. I created an entire company around it.
Yeah. Super bullish around that. But I'm a little more like, I do think that it's going to be very hard to get the drivers out of the seats. I think just from a like public acceptance. And I think that's not something I would expect to change in 10 years, other than limited use cases or like controlled environments. I mean, certainly like AV shuttles and things like that. But anyway, I think you're still gonna have drivers. You're gonna have long haul drivers, and they're gonna be using Uber Freight or using Convoy.
We'll bleep that part out.
Bleep that out.
Got it.
But yeah, they'll be using the Convoy product. On the broker side, this is where I do think there's going to be. I think the TMSs certainly there probably will be a shakeup because people embrace technology differently and they'll be able to like package that differently. But I think Convoy will be that behind the scenes, like the point by which you engage with these owner operators and these pools of like independent carriers and small carriers that are like doing their own thing and out on the road and empowered by Convoy, and just the easiest way to interact with that set. And I think brokers will be more and more commercially oriented, more and more, and have less of the like have to worry about less and less of the back office of the transactional or just like the the basic stuff. And on the front end, we'll be able to focus a lot more. I think the relationships continue to have value, and they'll focus more and more on the relationship building, the value adding activities. I think brokers too, over time, you've always seen this, but they have niches and specializations or industry specializations, capability specializations. I think if more stuff is automated, they can double down on the differentiation in terms of expertise and what they bring to the table. Yeah. And then I think there's just going to be different models. And so part of what I think the unknowns are is just there's going to be ways of packaging these things that we aren't even thinking of. It's kind of like when cell phones came out, nobody thought about Uber right out of the gate. It was a model that was like, as soon as you saw it, like, oh, this is obvious, but it wouldn't have been enabled without apps and without a smartphone, without the iPhone, right? And so I think similarly with AI, it's just going to be models that we're not thinking about now that will be enabled, which, it's going to be exciting. I do think this is probably another one of these, to your earlier point, it's like a pivot point where there's just going to be new companies that are going to be $10 billion companies that are going to be created. Like,
well, hopefully we have you on again before 10 years from now. But but we can also, maybe I'll send you a calendar invite for 2035 Friday, some random Friday, and we'll circle back on all these.
Cool. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Bill. Are you going to be at Manifest?
I am. Yeah.
All right, cool. We'll see you there.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Later.